Imagine a country where you can buy a state-of-the-art television for half what it cost 5 years ago. Where food gets cheaper every year. Where rent falls year after year. Sounds like paradise, does it not? Now imagine that in that country nobody spends. Why buy today if it will be cheaper tomorrow? Shops do not sell. Factories produce less. Companies lay people off. Wages fall. And as wages fall, people spend even less. Prices fall further. Companies lay off more. A vicious circle that feeds on itself. A downward spiral that is extraordinarily difficult to escape. This is not a theoretical exercise. It is what happened to Japan. For more than 30 years. The previous episode dealt with inflation, prices that rise. Today we are going to talk about its opposite, prices that fall. Deflation. Intuitively, lower prices seem like a good thing. And in some cases they are. When technology makes products cheaper, everyone benefits. But when prices fall because demand collapses, something very different and very dangerous is happening. Today we are going to understand why deflation terrifies economists, what a liquidity trap is, and what Japan's experience teaches us about the dangers of an economy that cannot get back on its feet. Before reaching Japan, let us go back to the 19th century. Because the history of deflation begins much earlier. In 1873, a financial crisis shook Europe and the United States. The trigger was the bursting of a speculative bubble in American railways. The failure of J. Cook & Company, one of the most important banks of the time, caused a domino effect. Hundreds of banks closed. Thousands of businesses went bankrupt. What followed was what contemporaries called the Great Depression, a name later reassigned to the crisis of the 1930s. Today we know it as the Long Depression, and it lasted, depending on how you measure it, until 1896. During those 23 years, prices fell steadily. In the United States, wholesale prices dropped by approximately 32%. In the United Kingdom, something similar. But here is the interesting part. Industrial production did not fall. In fact, it grew. Real income per capita increased. New technologies, the Bessemer process for steel, electricity, the telephone, were making production spectacularly cheaper. Steel went from costing $50 per ton to less than $20. It was good deflation. Lower prices caused by greater productive efficiency. Consumers could buy more with less. But there were victims. Farmers who had gone into debt to buy land during the boom now had to repay those loans in dollars that were worth more and more. Their wheat was worth less, but their debt remained the same. Many lost everything. And businesses that could not compete with the new industrial giants were devoured. The corporate consolidation of that era, which gave rise to the great American monopolies like Standard Oil and U.S. Steel, was partly a response to deflationary pressure. The Long Depression taught a first lesson. Deflation has winners and losers. And the losers tend to be those who are in debt. Irving Fisher appears again in our story. In 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, Fisher published a paper that changed the way we understand deflation. Fisher had lived through the prosperity of the 1920s. He had predicted the stock market would keep rising. He was spectacularly wrong. He lost his personal fortune in the crash of 1929. And from that devastating experience, he developed his theory of debt deflation. The idea is brutally simple. When prices fall, the real value of debts rises. If you owe 100,000 euros and prices drop by 10%, your salary probably falls too. But your debt is still 100,000 euros. In real terms, you now owe more. This forces debtors to cut spending drastically to make payments. They sell assets. The mass selling of assets drives prices down further. Deflation deepens. Real debts increase more. More cutbacks. More sales. More deflation. Fisher called it the paradox of deleveraging. The more people pay off their debts, the more they owe, because deflation increases the real value of what remains to be paid. It is a diabolical mechanism. And it is exactly what happened in the United States in the 1930s. And what would happen in Japan 60 years later? To understand what happened to Japan, we need to start in a New York hotel. On the 22nd of September, 1985, the finance ministers of 5 countries, the United States, Japan, West Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, met at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. They signed what is known as the Plaza Accord. The objective was to weaken the dollar, which was too strong against other currencies. And it worked. Over the next 2 years, the Japanese yen appreciated enormously against the dollar. This was a problem for Japan, whose economy depended on exports. A stronger yen made Japanese products more expensive abroad. To compensate, the Bank of Japan cut interest rates aggressively. Cheap money flooded the economy. And that cheap money created a spectacular bubble. Stock prices tripled between 1985 and 1989. Land prices in Tokyo soared so much that, according to some estimates, the land under the Imperial Palace was worth more than the entire state of California. It was madness. And like all bubbles, it ended. In late 1989, the Bank of Japan began raising rates to cool the bubble. The stock market crashed. Land prices began to fall. And they kept falling. And falling. What followed was not a normal recession. It was something much worse. It was a trap from which Japan could not escape for decades. Japanese banks had lent enormous amounts using land as collateral. When land prices collapsed, those guarantees were no longer worth what the books said. The banks had mountains of non-performing loans they did not want to acknowledge. They called them zombie loans. Companies, burdened with debt, stopped investing. Stopped hiring. Their only priority was paying down debt. The economist Richard Koo coined the term balance sheet recession to describe what was happening. The entire economy was simultaneously trying to reduce its debt, and that was sucking demand out like a black hole. The Bank of Japan lowered interest rates to zero. And the economy did not respond. Prices kept falling. People kept not spending. Why buy today if it will be cheaper tomorrow? Why invest if asset prices keep falling? This is what is called a liquidity trap. The interest rate is at zero and monetary policy stops working. You cannot lower rates below zero. Well, Japan tried. In January 2016, the Bank of Japan introduced negative rates. But the effect was minimal. Japan's average annual growth between 1991 and 2003 was 1.14%. Compare that to the vibrant growth of previous decades. Japan did not go into free fall. It went into stagnation. Slow, persistent, exhausting. People speak of the lost decades. In the plural. Because it was not one. It was three. Economists do not agree on what exactly went wrong in Japan. And this disagreement matters because it affects how we respond to similar situations. For Milton Friedman and Ben Bernanke, the blame lay fundamentally with the Bank of Japan. It did not act aggressively enough. It should have expanded the money supply much more, much sooner. It was a monetary policy failure. For Richard Koo, the problem was different. It was a balance sheet recession. When all economic agents are simultaneously paying down debt, neither cheap money nor zero rates can reactivate the economy. What was needed was massive and sustained public spending to compensate for the fall in private demand. And for other economists, the problem was structural. Japan had an aging population, a rigid labor market, a corporate system that protected big companies at the expense of innovation. Deflation was a symptom, not the disease. Probably all of them are partly right. The Japanese experience was complex, multi-causal, and cannot be explained by a single theory. But it left lessons that the world's central banks memorized. When the 2008 crisis came, the Federal Reserve and the ECB acted with an aggressiveness that would have been unthinkable without the Japanese example. They did not want to end up like Japan. And to a large extent, they did not. But the shadow of the lost decade still looms over global economic policy. It is important to distinguish between two types of deflation. Good deflation comes from technological progress. Computers are ever more powerful and cheaper. Televisions cost a fraction of what they did 20 years ago. Solar energy is cheaper every year. This deflation benefits consumers without harming the economy, because it reflects greater efficiency, not lower demand. Bad deflation comes from falling demand. When people do not spend, companies lower prices to attract customers. But customers still do not spend, waiting for even lower prices. Companies cut costs. Lay off workers. The laid off spend less. And the spiral continues. The difference is crucial. And sometimes they are confused. When prices fall because Amazon can offer cheaper products, that is progress. When prices fall because nobody has the money or the confidence to spend, that is a trap. Central banks aim for low but positive inflation, normally around 2%, precisely to maintain a safety cushion against deflation. Because once you enter a deflationary spiral, getting out is extraordinarily difficult. Japan needed 3 decades. Deflation seems harmless. Prices fall. Who can complain? But think about families with a mortgage. If prices fall, wages tend to fall too. But the mortgage does not go down. The monthly payments remain the same. In real terms, the debt grows. Families who could pay their mortgage on a normal salary find themselves drowning. Think about young people looking for work in a deflationary economy. Companies are not hiring because there is no demand. Those who find jobs accept lower wages. An entire generation is marked. This is exactly what happened to Japan's so-called lost generation. Young people who entered the labor market in the 1990s and never reached the income or stability levels their parents had. Not for lack of talent or effort. For lack of demand in the economy. Deflation is not simply the opposite of inflation. It is a problem with its own destructive dynamic. And its victims are, as always, those with the least margin. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, deflation is a sustained fall in prices. It can be good when it reflects technological advances, but it is devastating when it reflects a drop in demand. The deflationary spiral, prices fall, spending falls, employment falls, prices fall further, is one of the most dangerous mechanisms in economics. Second, a liquidity trap occurs when interest rates reach zero and monetary policy loses effectiveness. Japan lived this trap for 3 decades. Its experience changed how central banks around the world respond to crises. Third, debt deflation, Irving Fisher's concept, explains why deflation is especially destructive in indebted economies. When prices fall, real debts rise. And the more debtors try to pay, the worse the situation gets. Deflation is a slow poison. But inflation has a much more dramatic cousin. A monster that can destroy an economy in months. When inflation spirals completely out of control, people carry money in wheelbarrows. Banknotes are used as wallpaper. Prices double every few hours. It is called hyperinflation. And its stories are among the most shocking in all of economics. That, next time.